Hey guys, it's Lukian, and today I am going to be doing my May and June wrap-up. So I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in those months. It was the first 2 months that I was home for the summer because I took my last final on like May 2nd and then came back home on the 3rd, so I read a lot more no school books this time, so don't worry about that. But I did read quite a few books, so let's just jump into the video. The first book that I read in May was Take Me Home Tonight by Morgan Matson. This is a YA contemporary novel. And this book follows Kat and Stevie, who are best friends, and they both are really involved in the drama theater department at their school in suburban Connecticut. And it's April, and they decide that they are going to go to New York City for the night. And basically when they get there, a lot of shenanigans ensue. Everything that can go wrong does go wrong. They have no phones, they're separated, there's a dog in the mix, and they are just really trying to get back to Grand Central before midnight. And it's a really fun book. I don't want to say too much because it might be sort of spoilers. I went into the book knowing very, very little, and I really enjoyed that. There are circumstances that bring them to New York City, but it was kind of fun to figure that out on my own as I went through the book. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. It was a very fun, quick book to read. It's very similar to Save the Date by Morgan Matson, which I read in April, where it's a lot of hijinks, and as I said, everything that could possibly go wrong ends up going wrong, so there's a lot of high stress situations, but you know it'll work out in the end, so it's not that bad. I really liked both of the main characters. We start out with just one of their perspectives, but then we get the other's perspective later in the book, and it was really interesting. I liked both of them. I thought they were both pretty well developed, and I thought they had interesting internal conflicts. I thought their friendship was very realistic. And I also liked reading about a book that is set in New York City because I'm from a town that's only 30 minutes outside New York City, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And it was just a very fun, fast-paced contemporary book, and something that is very easy to read if you're looking for something kind of light and fluffy, but very high octane. The next book that I read was Watch Me by Tahereh Mafi, and I actually have a full reading vlog for this book. It is a spin-off to the Shatter Me series, and I talk a lot about it in that video. It's quite long and it's spoiler-filled, but I do have a spoiler-free section, so definitely check that out. But I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm super excited for the rest of the series. After that, I actually did a reread, and that was of Illuminae by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. This is one of the first books that I ever read, if not, it was either this or Everything Everything. That was the first book I read after being introduced to BookTube, so 2017. That's actually crazy to think about and very scary, but I did love this book when I read it the first time, and I have been meaning to read the other books in the series. I actually took these off my shelves and put them in that wardrobe over there, just because that's where I put books that I don't know if I'm gonna read or if I've read and don't want to keep on my shelves. But anyway, I had that with this series because it had just been so long since I read this book, and I didn't know if I was ever gonna finish it, but I just decided randomly to pick up this book again and reread it, and I did enjoy it. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I thought that a lot of this book relies on the cool format. Basically, this book is told in I don't know how to show you, security camera footage and text messages and emails and graphics, and it's a very cool idea for a book. It's very unique and creative. But I think the plot of this book actually lacked a little bit, and it was definitely way too long for my taste. When I read this the first time, it was basically every single book I read I gave 5 out of 5 stars because I didn't have anything to compare them to. I didn't really know what my tastes were. And since then I realized I don't love sci-fi, and yeah, so the plot itself was a little bit weak for me, but I did still enjoy the story. I like the format. It's a fun book to read, and I absolutely flew through it, even though it is quite hefty. But yeah, this one was good. It's kind of hard to describe, but it basically is just like a sci-fi book that takes place on this planet after an invasion, and there's a virus and crazy AI. It's interesting, and if you like sci-fi, I think you really enjoy this, and if you also like books that have very interesting formats. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the next books in the series in a little bit. After that, I read A Clash of Kings by George R. Martin. This is the second book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, the sequel to Game of Thrones. I read the first like 150 pages of this book while I was still at school. I was reading the ebook, and I was just like reading it really, really slowly, and I just decided, okay, I'm going to wait until I'm home so that I can read the physical copy. And I'm very glad I did, because it's just so much easier to read these books physically than as an ebook. So I really liked this book. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I don't know if I liked it more than Game of Thrones. I think I probably did, just because there was less setup and everything. We already knew the characters, we knew the world, we knew the circumstances and everything, so we were able to kind of get into like the nitty-gritty, the juicy details, and I also loved the ending of this book, and I definitely want to pick up A Storm of Swords somewhat soon. I don't know when, but I've heard that's most people's favorite book in the series. I think that's like the general consensus, but I'm sure you know what this series is about. I don't really want to explain it because it's super complicated, but it's basically just an epic high fantasy series that follows tons of different characters in this world as they are all sort of involved in this fight for the Iron Throne, which is whoever sits on it rules all 7 kingdoms. This book was definitely very dense at times. I did enjoy the plot, I think, more than a Game of Thrones, and I found myself connecting more to the characters than I did in that first book. I felt in a Game of Thrones like a little bit at arm's length with most of the characters, but I think in this book the cast really came into their own. Like, each of them seemed a little bit more well developed, and I do have to catch up on the show. I've only watched the first like 3 or 4 episodes of the show, so need to get on that, and probably watch like through to season 2 before I read A Storm of Swords. But this series is worth the hype. It's not like my favorite fantasy series of all time, but it's definitely very solid, and I think great if you like high fantasy. Then I picked up Gemina by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff, the second book in the Illuminae files. This is the book that has been on my TBR the longest. I think I added it like right after I read Illuminae in 2017, so basically 8 years, which is crazy. Like, I cannot believe I've been like involved in booktube for that long, but this is my favorite book in the series. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I really think that this book blended like the cool format and the plot very, very well. There's like illustrations in this book because one of the characters is an artist, and those illustrations are actually done by Marie Lu, which is super cool. And this book follows 2 new characters, and I thought they were a little bit more interesting than the main characters in Illuminae, and I also just thought the whole concept of this book was very interesting. So I read this one very, very fast as well, and yeah, definitely my favorite book in the series. Then I read A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. This is a Chinese-inspired fantasy story that follows a main character named Ning, who feels responsible for the death of her mother, and her sister is also very sick, so in order to try to find a cure for her sister, she ends up entering this competition where it's all this like magic that revolves around tea making. So it's very, very interesting, the magic system, and I loved the world. I loved the incorporation of all the mythology, and I just thought it was a really, really engaging fantasy story, very unique, but it wasn't like totally crazy. Like, it's very light fantasy, and I was very engaged the entire time. I just kind of flew through it. If you're looking for like a quiet YA fantasy, it's technically high fantasy because it takes place in like another world, but very easily accessible. I've said the word very so many times in the last like 30 seconds, but I think it's extremely easy to like get your bearings with this world, and it's a good entry fantasy. Like, if you usually read contemporary or historical and stuff and you want to get into fantasy, I think this is a great choice. And yeah, I thought the magic system was just so cool. I loved how it revolved around tea and everything, And although the magical competition thing is very overdone in fantasy these days, I think this was an interesting twist on that trope. After that, I picked up Crimson Bound by Rosamund Hodge. I totally picked this up on a whim, but it is a fantasy story that is a loose retelling of Little Red Riding Hood set in a fantasy version of a French court. And we follow a main character named Rochelle, who is kind of like... Ooh, this book is hard to describe. There's a lot going on in this book, and it's kind of thrown at you at the start of the story, and you have to mine your way through all the information. It definitely makes more sense as the story progresses, but I knew very little going in, because I had read the synopsis on the back so many times and it made no sense to me, but once I actually started the story and things began to piece themselves together, it made a lot more sense. But it's a gothic story. There's this main character, Rochelle, she's kind of like a magical being. There are these people that are like wolf creatures. It's very difficult to articulate what this story is, but I really liked it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought Rochelle was a super interesting main character. I liked all of the side characters. I thought the world was very, very interesting and complex and dark and twisted, and I loved the little, like, incorporations of Little Red Riding Hood. It's very subtle, but it's there if you're looking for it. And I thought the buildup of tension throughout the book was really well done, and it totally just like explodes by the end. So it's a pretty underrated story. I only know like one person who's read it, but it's really interesting, and there's like interstitial chapters with this like fairy tale. It's really cool. I'm definitely interested in reading more from Rosamund Hodge, and yeah, definitely a very surprising favorite of the year for me. Then I did another reread, and this time I decided to pick up Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. This is one of my favorite historical fiction books, and I was watching Read by Zoe's like vlog from a few years ago where she was reading this, and I was like, you know what? I haven't read the book in like 5 years. I really want to pick it up again, and I literally read it in like one day. That's how much I loved it. I think the back of this book like summarizes everything really well. It says, Winter 1945, 4 refugees, 4 secrets, each one born of a different homeland, each one hunted and haunted by tragedy, lies, war. As thousands desperately flock to the coast in the midst of the Soviet advance, 4 paths converge, vying for passage aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff, a ship that promises safety and freedom, but not all promises can be kept. I think that is a really great way to just like describe this book. It's very succinct, but it definitely gives you a good idea of what you're getting into with this story. All 4 main characters are so complex and so interesting, and we bounce between their point of views very, very quickly. One of them is a young Polish girl who's actually from like present-day Ukraine. One of them is a Lithuanian nurse. One of them is a Prussian something, I don't want to give it away, and one of them is a German soldier. So their paths kind of converge, and there's this whole thing with the ship, which is the deadliest maritime incident in human history. So, as I said, one of my absolute favorite historical fiction books of all time. I'm really happy I reread it, and I think it is a book that pretty much everyone can find something to enjoy in. It's so hard-hitting, and one of the few books that can actually make me cry. Then I followed up that amazing 5-star reread, one of my favorite books ever, with a 1-star book, and that was Obsidio by Amie, Kaufman, and Kristoff. This book, I don't even know what to say. This is genuinely like gonna be on my least favorite books of the year list, obviously. It was so bad. Like, this book follows, again, 2 new main characters, but it also brings back the other 4 from the first 2 books. And there was just so much of this book was literally just this. Was security camera, like, logs or whatever it's called. I forget what they call it in the book. But it's just this, and it's just really boring to read. Like, I hated those sections in Illuminae and Gemina as well, but they're pretty, like, spaced out. They're not the entire book, but literally like 50% of this book, it felt like, was just these surveillance footage summaries, and there's no, it's just literally writing out like what's going on with no like, it was just, it's genuinely so boring to read. It's as if like a robot was just explaining, like, what they're seeing, basically, with no emotion, nothing. It was so boring. I totally just, like, skim read the last, like, 200 to 300 pages of this book because I was so bored. I didn't care about anything that was happening. I wish this had just been a duology. Like, this whole book could have been just tacked onto the end of Gemina and it would have had the exact same effect. I genuinely don't even remember how this book ended because it was so disappointing. So yeah, definitely left the series with a bad taste in my mouth, and I don't think I'm going to be keeping it. So yeah, that's unfortunate. I did like the first 2 books genuinely. I really liked Gemina, but this one was just a total letdown. After that, I picked up The Ragpicker King by Cassandra Clare. This is the sequel to Swordcatcher, and is the second book in the Chronicles of Castellane series, which follows 2 main characters, the first being Kell, who, when he was younger, he was taken from his orphanage and brought to the palace because he looks like the crown prince, and they need someone to stand in for the prince, whose name is Connor, when there are events with high risk, so that Kell will die instead of Connor, because he's the only heir. And the other main character is Lynn, who is a part of this kind of ostracized group in Castellane who has magic, and she ends up becoming involved with Kell and Connor and court politics and everything. I did really like the first book, and I was excited to continue with this book, and I really liked this one. I liked it a lot more than the first book. I gave it like 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is super engaging. I thought the plot for both of the main characters is really interesting. There's a lot of like mystery and intrigue in this installment. There is a lot of kind of involvement with other kingdoms and stuff, so I liked that a lot. We learn more about the Ragpicker King, who is like the crime ruler of the city of Castellane, and definitely a super solid sequel and a great setup for the third book in the series. There's tons of magic in this book, and I think it definitely took the things from Swordcatcher that made it interesting and just increased them tenfold, and it was a lot of, like, the first book was a lot of setup, but I think this one was a great continuation. Cassandra Clare always knows how to write a middle book in trilogies, so I always have faith in her. Also, I love this cover. This is the Illuminae Special Edition. It is so beautiful, and under the dust jacket, there's this, and the end papers are also stunning. I also love how in this book there are a lot of like interstitial chapters from other characters' points of view, because the main narrative is limited to Kell and Lynn, but we do get to see glimpses into other characters' heads, which I think really just expanded the book and made it a lot more interesting and kind of widened the scope of the series as a whole. So really enjoyed this, cannot wait for the third book in the series. Then I read The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a very interesting book. It's kind of like every single genre. Like, it has historical fiction vibes, it has fantasy vibes, it has like contemporary romance vibes. So yeah, there's also like some mystery aspects to it. There's a lot to enjoy in this book. It is kind of like a comedy of manners, so think like a Jane Austen book. It definitely reminded me a lot of that vibe, and it takes place in this city that's kind of has like French vibes, but also like Victorian London vibes, and there's a main character named Nina who kind of like falls head over heels for this guy named Hector, but she is like supposed to be one of the beautiful ones who are like these girl. It's kind of like debutante situation, but her cousin's wife is like getting in the middle of it all. So we go between the 3 points of view of Nina, Hector, and Valerie, I believe is her name if I'm remembering correctly, who is like Nina's cousin's wife. And this was enjoyable. I thought that, as I said, it's like a good blend of all of the different genres. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was just a good like palate cleanser to read, and I love the cover, and it was just, yeah, it was a very solid book. I liked how it incorporated a ton of different elements and brought them together. It worked really well, and I think that the plot was interesting as well. I liked the characters, and I thought the writing was really beautiful. So I am intrigued to read some other Silvia Moreno-Garcia books, but this was definitely a good start, and a pretty universally, like, definitely a book that has a lot of universal appeal. After that, I read another book that has been on my TBR for quite a while, and that is Frontlines by Michael Grant. This is a World War II historical fiction novel, but kind of alternate historical fiction that follows three women, or like young girls, teenage girls, who enlist in the army because there has been like a decree in the United States that women are allowed to join and go on the front lines. So we follow three main characters, as I said. There's Rio, Frangie, and Rainey, and they all have different circumstances, different reasons for joining, but they all end up in North Africa, and just follows the war. I have had this book on my shelf for a long time, and I decided to pick it up, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was good. It was a little bit disappointing. I just think that it was a little bit boring. Like, the first half I was like, okay, we're getting introduced to all the characters, we're doing the army training. I think the second half where they're actually in combat will be a lot more interesting, but then the second half where they were in combat, there was just like a lot of fight scenes, obviously, but it just seemed like it seemed almost like reading a textbook, sort of. I don't know, it was just like not very engaging. There were parts of this book that I really, really liked, but other parts that were just a little bit boring and tedious to get through. It's super long as well, and I just think that it could have been cut down a lot and just like taken the good parts. But overall, not a terrible book. I wouldn't be opposed to continuing the series, but this first installment was just not my favorite. So yeah, if you are interested in that concept and you're okay with like just a lot of like battle scenes or like action scenes and not a ton of like character, like if you care more about like action and plot than characters, you might find this one very interesting. Okay, then I went on vacation to Italy with my family, and I decided to reread a series favorite of mine, so I picked up Passenger and Wayfarer by Alexandra Bracken. This is a time travel series, and I wanted to pick this up because it follows these characters traveling through time and space, and I wanted to read it while I was on vacation because there's a lot of really cool settings in this series. It follows 2 main characters, the first being Etta, who lives in New York City in present day, and she ends up finding herself on a ship in the Atlantic in 1776 and meeting Nicholas, our other main character, who tells her that she is a part of a long line of time travelers, and the two of them are set out on this quest to find a magical object that has the potential to change time travel forever. And I love this series. I love Alexandra Bracken so much, but this is my favorite series from her. It's one of my favorite series of all time. I love getting to explore all of the different settings. We go to like every single continent, so many different times, and you know, just everything. It is so cool. I love the way that Alexandra Bracken wrote about time travel, all of the cool rules and everything. And yeah, I gave both these books 5 out of 5 stars. I just flew through them as a reread. I love these characters so much. I love the writing, love the settings, and how like she incorporates all of these different like centuries and places. So if you want to read a time travel book with lots of diverse settings and cool characters and a huge like breadth of like time, definitely pick these up. Okay, and the last book that I read in June was Spindle by E.K. Johnston. This is the companion to A Thousand Nights, which I read in April, so I talked about that in my last wrap-up. But this is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, and it takes place many, many centuries after the end of A Thousand Nights, and we follow a character who is trying to help the princess of this kingdom that has been caught in a curse for many, many years. This was pretty disappointing as well. I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. I did not like it nearly as much as A Thousand Nights. I thought A Thousand Nights was so magical and such an interesting story and an interesting retelling. But this one was just like, okay, like, it had a cool setting as well. The writing was interesting at points, but like the plot itself was just like really boring. Like, it was a lot of walking and journeying and talking instead of doing, and the final like battle is literally like 15 pages long. So it was just a lot to trudge through, and A Thousand Nights has a super slow plot as well, but the writing is just so beautiful, and I loved the main character so much that it made up for that. But the main character in this was, like, pretty one-dimensional. Like, I felt for him at points, but, like, the other characters were just kind of there, and yeah, definitely not my favorite. A little bit disappointing, but not terrible. I love the cover, so that's a plus, but I don't think I will be holding on to this book for very long, unfortunately. So that was a great note to end this video on, but anyway, if you've read any of these books, I'd love to know your thoughts on them. We can definitely chat in the comments, and I would also love to know what books you read in May and June. But that is it for this video. I really hope you all enjoyed. All of my social media links are in the description box below, and I will see you soon for a new video. Bye!